Well, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. And thank you guys for tuning in to another video. Is it June yet? You're darn right it is, folks. We have finally made it, and it is CFL season has finally arrived. I guess I shouldn't actually say that, but the date we are recording this, it is still in May, but by the time we are uploading this to you, which will be the 1st of June, it will be the month of June, which means it is the kickoff of the CFL season. And oh boy, are we excited for this 2025 season here on the Canadian Football Fanatics. You guys will be finding a ton of content from us this year. Not only will we be covering the BC Lions, we'll of course be doing all things CFL, specifically the Canadian football athletes. And of course, we'll be on the 13th Man Football weekly show every Wednesday night throughout the season, chopping it up, talking CFL football as we did last year. Now, why are we here for today's video? Today's video is our CFL Kickoff Show. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be uploading this video on the 1st of June. And this is to get you guys nice and excited for the CFL season, as the anticipation has been building all off season. I know with training camp and preseason games, it's starting to get a little bit more. It's starting to feel a little bit more real, where you can, the light is at the end of the tunnel. You can kind of see the regular season within your grasp. And like I said, by the time this is uploaded and you guys are listening to this, it will be officially game week with the CFL kicking off on June 5th. Like I mentioned, we'll be uploading this on June 1st, Sunday, June 1st. So hopefully you guys are enjoying your Sunday. And as you can tell by the title of the video, we're going to be joined by one Farhan Lalji of TSN. So Farhan is going to join us for about 15 or so minutes. I know he's a busy guy with being a family guy, covering hockey, covering football, you name it for TSN. So we're very grateful of Farhan's time here today. Farhan's going to join us for a few questions, kind of a league-wide segment with Farhan. And then after that, we're going to be sticking around for giving our predictions of how the Western Division is going to shape up, how the East Division is going to shape up, and we'll even give our award winners. And we're actually going to start with a bold or hot take here in a few seconds if we have enough time before Farhan jumps in here. But before we do, make sure that, folks, if you guys are enjoying our content, if you guys are enjoying this video specifically, please like the video. Please feel free to leave a comment down below. Let us know how you're feeling going into the CFL season. If you're, how you're feeling about your favorite team, how you're feeling about the season in general. I'm going to ask Farhan a couple questions about, kind of like I said, league-wide topics that I think will put on a very good product on the field this year. So let us know how you're feeling in general for the start of the 2025 CFL season. And lastly, most importantly, please feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're trying to close in on 400 subscribers. And like I've mentioned, folks, the numbers do not lie. Over 75% of you are still unsubscribed to the channel. And it would be greatly, greatly appreciated if you guys could do that for us. So other than that, like I said, Farhan's going to join us here in a matter of moments. We're going to be giving our standing predictions both for the East and the West. Small little kind of segue reminder, if you guys haven't listened to it already, Blake and I recorded last week our schedule record prediction for the BC Lions in the 2025 season. Go check that out right now, and you guys will have an idea, or you guys will be able to kind of maybe guess or gauge where the Lions might finish in my predictions for this season. I'm going to kind of line that up. That was kind of my intention with doing that exercise with Blake. If Blake and I, ironically, of course, I was excited to start off that we were very different in our predicting, and then we ended up both, small little teaser, I guess, to stick around to the end of the video, folks, to see where the Lions might sit in the West Division. But we both had them going 12-6 on the year. Where might that sit in the West Division? Who knows? Stick around for later, like I mentioned. But as I said, if you guys haven't, if you're guys Lions fans, CFL fans, go check out that video. It was a ton of fun with Blake. It was about an hour long. It was just over an hour long. And, for about 10 or so minutes, Blake and I caught up and chatted, general topics, kind of the intro of most of our shows, of just catching up, as I mentioned, some banter back and forth. And then probably about that 10-minute mark, we get into week number 1, and we go all the way through into week number 21 of the season. So ton of fun with Blake. As I said, folks, the season is here, And we're going to start off with a bang before Farhan joins us here. And I'm going to kind of just tease a little bit of my boldest take, or maybe my one of my hotter takes, kind of going into the year. And I would love for you guys to involve yourselves, or maybe comment down below what you guys are kind of feeling in terms of, bold hot take kind of goes around a lot, but it can even just be a general opinion of how you think, maybe a certain quarterback, team, stat, whatever it may be, etc. Comment down below. I'm going to go with my biggest bold take, I guess is maybe the best way to put it, is going to be that I believe three quarterbacks will pass for 5,000 yards this season. Now, why do I say that? I think I say that because I look at the current state of the quarterbacks, and that's where we're going to transition with Farhan here in a matter of moments. I think it is, very, I don't know if I want to say very deep, trying to find a kind of the right wording here when talking about the quarterbacks. I think the depth of the quarterbacks is very strong this year, with some of the quarterbacks that are getting starting opportunities pushing some of those veteran starters down the rung a little bit, and they're in backup positions. I look at when talking about three quarterbacks passing for 5,000 yards and why I think that's a possibility. We look at last year with Bo Levi Mitchell going for 5,000 yards. He was the lone quarterback to pass for 5,000 yards. And I believe nobody else even really sniffed 5,000 yards from the quarterback position last year. I think this year kind of sets up really well for quarterbacks. And I look at the landscape and think of the amount of guys I think realistically could go after that 5,000 yard mark. I think I started at the top with a guy who I'm going to predict goes for 5,000 yards for sure. I think is Vernon Adams Jr. of the Calgary Stampeders. I think Vernon Adams Jr. is going to be very motivated in Calgary this upcoming year. We saw him in a little bit of preseason action, look pretty crisp over there in Calgary with his new weapons. And I think, unfortunately for VA and probably Calgary, they're going to be down in some games where they're going to have to pass their way back into it. They're going to be, maybe not unfortunately for them, probably playing to their strengths as well, right? Throwing the ball in the air. We saw what Vernon Adams was capable of last season with the BC Lions, the last few seasons, I should say. And then you look at Bo Levi Mitchell. I think he is the second contender to pass for 5,000 yards as well. I think it's realistic for Bo once again because we saw it from him last season. But not only that, I think the additions of Kenny Lawler, I think that offensive line is going to be very motivated to try to continue to play for Bo Levi Mitchell, a Hall of Fame caliber guy like that, where you're trying to, I would think Bo in that locker room, right? They believe that they can win it all, right? And they're trying to, let Bo ride off into the sunset with a Grey Cup championship this year, which he has said, I believe on a few occasions that, the ideal ending to his career would be riding off into the sunset after winning a Grey Cup. So I think, he's another interesting one for me in terms of, yes, he is getting up there and maybe it's starting to come off the cliff whenever, or excuse me, maybe he starts to, not fall off the cliff is what I'm trying to say, but he starts to trend towards, the latter half of his career, which is, I'm not kind of saying anything that's too surprising to people, right? With Bo and at Bo's age and his Hall of Fame level career, like I mentioned, when looking at three, that third option, excuse me. But I think, 3 through 7 quarterbacks or something like that, I think realistically they could have opportunities. I think the next guy that I realistically think would be Trevor Harris to pass for 5,000 yards. I think the big question mark with Trevor Harris, of course, is that if he can stay healthy or not. That is question number one, of course. And, I'm kind of curious if, Saskatchewan goes after something like that with, kind of their playing style. I think they're going to try to lean a little bit more into AJ Ouellette. That defense as well, I think, is going to be very stiff. And it'll be interesting to see kind of, I think Saskatchewan will be putting a lot of games away come the fourth quarter. And that kind of, I don't think sets up Trevor Harris the greatest in terms of going after 5,000 yards. But I think talent-wise, Trevor Harris with the receiving core, with the offensive line, I know he's been losing some offensive line, which is very unfortunate. But with the offensive line, with the receivers that he has at his helm, I think it is possible if Trevor Harris is able to stay healthy as well. These next two guys I think are pretty interesting as well, with Zach Collaros being one of them. Another, um, veteran guy who is trying to, similar to Bo, win a Grey Cup, and obviously Zach Collaros just signed his extension, so not necessarily right off into the sunset, but for Zach Collaros, almost cement himself as the 2020s, decade quarterback, right? And kind of, I know that the dynasty talk has been put to bed until we see what happens in the future with Winnipeg if they're able to win at home this year. But I think Zach Collaros is a candidate as well, especially with a new offensive coordinator, Buck Pierce coming over to BC. I think things are going to be a little bit different in Winnipeg. I know Buck Pierce, I don't believe Zach Collaros passed for more than 30 attempts per game with the averages with Buck Pierce as his offensive coordinator. I look at these three, or I guess I look at Nathan Rourke number 5 is the kind of that candidate. I think talent-wise, Nathan Rourke can. Now with Buck Pierce, I kind of question that a little bit in terms of what do we see, 60-40 run pass, 50-50 true split. I'm curious to see how we work that out, and I think that will hold back Nathan from maybe going after that 5,000-yard mark as well. And then I look at two young quarterbacks here lastly before Farhan jumps in, and I look at Drew Brown first. I look at Drew Brown because, with Ottawa, their receiving court, obviously it's a bummer that they lose Canadian Nick Marner last year. Uh, Ottawa's 2024 first round pick down with the ACL for this year. But talent-wise, I really like what I saw from Drew Brown last year. I thought he was a pretty good, executed the offense pretty good for Ottawa, and gives me kind of some gunslinger vibes to him. And I think it'll be interesting one. He's kind of towards the bottom half of some of my candidates in terms of that. But the last candidate that I think could potentially go for that mark would be, I think, Davis Alexander. I think Davis Alexander, although I will say, folks, a little bit of a, I don't want to say a concern, but definitely you kind of take a little bit of a step back of like, oh, after the preseason game, he had not the greatest of games, and he played, I believe it was just over 3/4, or maybe it was just 3/4 against a lot of backups, and wasn't able to muster a lot of offense. I believe there was 1 point total overall. I think I'm more okay with that than some of the fans that I've seen in terms of, Alexander's still a young starter in the CFL. I would still think that there's going to be some growing pains for Davis. The thing for me that I think kind of holds me back from wanting to say that Davis is you know, I think Davis is probably towards the bottom. It is at the bottom of my realistic candidates to go over 5,000 yards. I think just with script, they're going to be up a lot of games. Their defense, as I mentioned, I think talent-wise, Tyson Philpott and some of those weapons in there set up Davis Alexander to go after that this season. And we saw them carry on their win streak from last season into 2024. They carry on and were, by all accounts, the best team in the CFL in 2024. I think a lot of people, kind of forgot about that and are sleeping on Montreal going into the season. Right or wrong, I think they're kind of favoriting the reigning undisputed Toronto Argonauts as champions. But for me, I look at a team like the Montreal Alouettes, and I'm really kind of high on them. I just don't know. I think that kind of, unfortunately, holds back a guy like Davis Alexander a little bit. But that was my hot take, folks. Bold take, like I said. Feel free to let us know down below a hot take or bold take of yours. Feel free to leave it in the comment. And like I said, Farhan Lalji is going to be joining us in a second for our CFL Kickoff Show. So we're going to be joined by Farhan. And like I said, stick around for after Farhan gets out of here. And we're going to be giving our standing predictions. So we are going to be letting you know how the East Division turns out. Like I said, I think people are sleeping on Montreal. Maybe you are too. Maybe you're not. Let us know in the comment sections. And then we are also going to be, I shouldn't say we. I'm going to also be giving my predictions for the West Division as well. So I think awards are another thing that are going to be an interesting one, and something that I would love to share with you guys as well. So let us know down below. I can even maybe give you a tease for who I got for Coach of the Year, which is Corey Mace. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but I want to kind of get into the quarterbacks a little bit more, folks. And that's where I'm going to talk with Farhan first of all. And I think it's the state of the quarterback positions, as I was mentioning, with some of those guys that, the return of Rourke and kind of shuffling out VA. I think kind of VA goes to another team that adds another quarterback into the starting lineup in terms of the landscape in the CFL. And then I look at three young guys who, really kind of changed the landscape of things with Drew Brown, Davis Alexander, and one Trey Ford, really kind of making things interesting in terms of being three young quarterbacks that are, have been given the keys to the franchise at a pretty young age, and over some veteran talents that are in the building. Drew Brown, maybe one thing with a guy like, I know Schultz is there, but you look at, Davis Alexander and Trey Ford specifically, and those guys, you know, you look at who's backing them up with, MBT and, sorry, folks, MBT, Trey Ford, Cody Fajardo, excuse me. But my apologies, folks. Just trying to, when talking about the quarterbacks, like I was saying, Davis Alexander, Trey Ford, with Fajardo and MBT, two guys that are proven Grey Cup champions, as we were just talking about the last two Grey Cup winners. I guess I should say going back 3 years ago for MBT, but both with championship pedigree, and they are moved to the sidelines for younger quarterbacks that are a little bit more inexperienced than the ones that are in front of them. So that's going to be an interesting one to talk about with Farhan as well. And he's going to be joining us here in a matter of moments to talk about the quarterbacks. And it's unfortunate because I would, um, actually, maybe we'll kind of actually we'll stick around. It won't be just an hour show actually today. We'll sneak in maybe an extra 10 or 15 minutes where we can actually cover a little bit more with obviously our deal with Rogers, folks. Stick around for that as well. Super cool opportunity for us where we'll be airing all of our content on Rogers TV this upcoming season. So all of Blake and I's, BC Lions stuff, like I was kind of just going to say there, it was unfortunate I'm not going to be able to sneak in a couple Lions questions for Farhan, but it is what it is, unfortunately. Like I was saying before I get too all over the place, our deal with Rogers, it's going to be a cool one for us to hopefully get, out to a wider audience with, very, very thankful and appreciative for Todd Jones, the producer at the Nanaimo studio here in town, for reaching out, for giving me the opportunity to work with a platform such as Rogers. So, as I was saying, we will be all of our previews. So, like I was saying with Blake uh, on the prediction show, Blake and I will be uploading a preview for the BC Lions one day before the game's played. So if the game's on Saturday, we'll be uploading it on Friday. That will be on Rogers TV as well as our post-game show, which will be right after the BC Lions play. Unfortunately, some due to traveling and stuff like that have to be recorded the next morning. But that being said, we will also be able to air our podcast episodes on Rogers TV as well. The unfortunate thing, though, is that it will be capped at 1 hour long, is the only bummer. So, kind of is what it is, unfortunately. I think the cool thing is what we're going to do here to adapt is that uh, YouTube exclusives is, I think, what we're going to try to go with here of like, you know, at the 1 hour mark, let's say, we have to unfortunately kind of shut her down for, Rogers purposes and TV time. We only have about 59 minutes of airtime. So with that, I think recording, sometimes our post game shows get a little bit longer. We have a lot to say, as you see with multiple of our shows kind of going a little bit over an hour, getting into that hour and a half mark. It kind of is what it is, unfortunately. And I think the fix with that is to go for the YouTube exclusives of what I was just saying. So what we will do today for the first time is after that hour mark, if you guys are tuning in on Rogers TV, you guys can find the rest of the video over on our YouTube channel at the Canadian Football Fanatics. So very cool opportunity for us to work with Rogers TV and to grow our audience, not only for the island here, but to grow our audience province wide, which I think is a great opportunity to partner with Rogers. And like I said, we will turn things into YouTube exclusives after the hour mark. So got about 59 minutes of airtime, and then afterwards, like I said, we'll kind of make sure we put in a little disclaimer at the end of our video, and it will be a YouTube exclusive from that point on. So our guest is here. Let's bring him in. One Farhan Lalji from TSN. Farhan, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Good, Cole. How are you?
Oh, we're doing well. We're doing well. Excited because it is CFL season. By the time we're uploading this, Farhan, it'll be June 1st. So it'll be
Wow.
all asking, is it June yet? Is it June yet? It is, folks. So, Farhan, the kind of goal for today was to do a little bit of a CFL kickoff show, and we'll be sticking around after you leave because I know you only have about a few minutes to join us. We were just chatting about the quarterbacks, and that's where I wanted to start with you and the state of the quarterbacks in the CFL right now. I think growing up as a kid, I look around the West Division, maybe specifically with guys like Henry Burris, Ricky Ray, and Lulays and stuff like that. Anthony Calvillo's obviously, and I think we kind of got away from that, maybe going into COVID, coming out of COVID. But now we look at the state of the quarterback position going into this year, and I think we'll serve a great product on the field for fans and stuff like that. With you know the not only the starting quarterbacks in the CFL, but I think some of the veterans as well, with guys like MBT and Cody Fajardo as well, kind of being pushed down the ladder a little bit here. I'm really excited to kind of see the product on the field when it comes to the quarterback position. But what do you think about kind of the state of the quarterbacks and how that'll kind of play out on the field this year?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it's going to be really good. And, I remember going back to 2016, and that was, John Jennings had the really good 2015 season. And then coming back into 16, you looked across the league, and not only did every team look solidified at the position going into the year, but they also look good at the backup position. Now obviously as the year progressed, things play out certain ways, but going into the year, the people had a pretty good reason to feel good about the depth across the league. And then I think we went through some hiccups at times, especially coming out of COVID. And now I think we're back in a really good place. And for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, I think every team across the league has made a decision by choice. It hasn't been thrust upon them, and they feel really good about their situation, right? I mean, Calgary feels like they've completely upgraded the spot. Montreal had a choice to make, and I think they made absolutely the right choice with Davis Alexander. That's going to open up that offense tenfold. You got Drew Brown in his second year as a starter in Ottawa, and can Bo Levi Mitchell recapture what he did a year ago? And now there's depth in places like Hamilton with Taylor Powell in behind, in BC with Chase Bryce going into his third year, and also Jeremiah Masoli there. And then PJ Walker's going to be some questions, right, in terms of his CFL readiness, but we know that he's pro ready because of the experience that he's had in the NFL. And we talked about Fajardo as a backup in Edmonton, a really good stylistic fit for Trey Ford. McLeod Bethel Thompson, you mentioned, backing up Davis Alexander. So I think across the board, people feel pretty good about where they're at. I mean, Saskatchewan, if they can keep Trevor Harris healthy, you got Jake Mayer, who's been a 3-year starter. Experienced guys that all of a sudden, if a guy gets hurt, the season is not lost.
We all love the CFL, Farhan, but I think specifically here with our channel, we try to really spotlight the Canadian side, right? With obviously being the Canadian Football Fanatics, and you're obviously you're a veteran, Farhan. You've been around, and how cool is it for you to watch the evolution of Canadian athletes? You have a young son of yourself, right? Growing up, and as a football player, we look at growing up, a lot of times it was kind of the offensive lineman and maybe a field receiver and a field corner and potentially maybe a D lineman somewhere on the defense. Now we look at premium positions, and we're calling them ratio breaking type players, where a lot of the elite players are kind of Canadians, right? We saw last year with Brady Oliveira winning the MOP, first time since John Cornish won it, I believe, in 2012, 2013. How cool is it for you to watch, not only, like I was saying, the field corner, field receivers, the premium positions like quarterback as well with Rourke and Ford, and we look at McInnes and Philpott now, and Ford as well, and Terrell in the secondary as well, and Dequoy. How cool has that been for you to watch the evolution?
Yeah, it's been great. And, as a guy that hosts the draft show, it's great to not always be talking about offensive linemen, right? And there was a time when no matter what, even if the player wasn't great, you were going to see offensive linemen get kind of pushed up the draft because those are the positions people wanted to be starting Canadians in. And now I think there's less of that. You're seeing more teams with 3 American offensive linemen, right? Because they feel they've got enough flexibility with their other Canadians that they could go wherever and and just play with that, whether it's a Canadian at corner, whether it's 2 to 3 Canadians at receiver or Canadians at running back, like what have you, right? I don't think there are any sacred cows in terms of what positions Canadians have to line up on at. And, there's so many layers to it, right? Because you're seeing Canadian kids at the high school level more prepared. You're seeing kids leave Canada early and go to the United States and getting into prep schools and getting opportunities to play down there. But then the players that wind up staying in U Sports coaching and resources, it's better than it's ever been, right? You look at a program like Guelph, which now has 7 full-time coaches, and UBC's got tons of resources there in their program. And, we know about Laval, we know about Western. A school like Laurier is all of a sudden, in that conversation. So there's so much more in the way of resources that even if you're coming through the U Sport system, you're not coming into the CFL with any deficiencies. You're ready to play. And, you couple that with teams just being more open to the possibility of playing Canadians across the board, just wherever they happen to be good. It's a good time to be a Canadian in the Canadian Football League.
Now, Farhan, I kind of want to sneak in a two-parter. I know you got to go here in a second,
Okay.
but I kind of want to just get your general outlook on both divisions. If we could maybe start in the West, I think there's quite a bit of parity as we kind of saw a little bit last year with, on any given week, I think teams could win in the Western Division, and it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out. What's just kind of your general outlook on the West Division right now?
Yeah, I tend to agree, right? I do believe that Saskatchewan is kind of the one team that's picking up from a high level they were at a year ago, and I think has taken an even greater step forward. Every year we say Winnipeg is going to take a step back, and they never do, but I just think Saskatchewan's better. I just do, and that's going to offend people in Winnipeg, but that's the way it is. And I think if Trevor Harris stays healthy, they've got depth across the board in a number of different spots. So I do think Saskatchewan's the favorite. Curious to see what happens with BC. To me, they have the biggest question marks around them, and which is not to say they're going to take a step back because they weren't great a year ago, but how much of a leap will Nathan Rourke take? I think there's some areas at receiver and DB where they need to get a little bit better and a little bit deeper. Can those players take the next step? Can the offensive line improve? And I think they've made some acquisitions and some decisions that will allow for that to happen, but will allow them to be in an elite spot. I don't know. Edmonton will be better. Will they be better enough, right? Like that defensive line could be the best in football, or in the CFL, I should say. And then you've got Calgary, which will also be better, but will they be better enough, right? Like there's no way you're not going to be better with Vernon Adams there and some of the additions they've made, the Dominic Rhymes and others that will help their pass rush, that'll help at receiver. They've got some bigger bodies for Vernon to throw to. So I think everybody's got a reason to be optimistic in the West, but I think when the dust settles, I think Saskatchewan is going to come out of it. But you could wind up with a whole bunch of teams at 9-9, right? Or just within a game of 9-9. I think it could be that competitive. And then you've got the East, right? And I like Montreal. They were the best team in the East last year, even though they didn't get to the Grey Cup. They're the best team in the East again, in my opinion, on paper. And Davis Alexander's a stud. I think he's going to be great. I think he could win the MOP this year. So, Hamilton will feel like they're better. Ted Govaya's made good moves. Ottawa took a step last year. I think they can take another one, and we'll see what Toronto looks like given their losses. But I think Montreal's coming out of the East. I just think they've got too much talent. They were too good a year ago. They haven't taken a step back, and I think they're better at quarterback.
Farhan, if I could just sneak one more quick one, it kind of touches home a little bit more, and you've spoken on this a little bit, but can you talk about the Mara Doman effect and him kind of modernizing? I think you used the term of not only the BC Lions, but the CFL and the kind of the influence he's putting on across the league and just everything he's been doing.
Yeah, look, he's checked all the right boxes in his 3 years as owner, now going into 4. And, we talk about the concerts. Those are kind of the obvious moves, but they do allow everybody to think big. Now, sometimes everyone else gets criticized because why aren't you doing what Amar Doman does? But understand when you do a concert like that to kick off the year, you have the potential to sell 30,000 new tickets. So there's a lot of revenue that comes with that. Most stadiums can't give you that outside of Edmonton. Calgary can take a bit of a jump, but everybody else is operating at the upper levels of what their stadiums can hold to begin with, right? So it doesn't always make sense for everybody, but he's showing that you can think big and that you've got to spend money to make money, and he does that. And so he has raised the standard for everybody league wide, because Amar Doman doesn't need to make money on the BC Lions. Given his assets, the CFL, the Lions are a rounding error, but he doesn't view it that way, right? He comes from a place of passion, and he wants to make it better, and he still wants to push boundaries to find new forms of revenue and things like that, so that they can be profitable, because that's just how he works. But he's pushing the envelope, and everybody around the league is being forced to listen.
Farhan, I appreciate your time so much. I know you're a busy guy. I see your dad's schedule of you're here, there, and everywhere. So very gracious of your time, Farhan. I appreciate you for jumping on today.
Thanks for having me. Enjoy the season.
Of course, we'll see you around, Farhan. That was Farhan Lalji of TSN joining us. Very grateful, as I said, for Farhan joining us today to talk some CFL football. Hopefully, we'll be able to have Farhan on during the season at some point, and maybe we'll run into him at the stadium and we'll be able to ask him that in person once again. So, to get back into the video a little bit, folks, like I was saying, CFL Kickoff Show is what we're going with here for the next about half hour or so, maybe go 40 or so minutes. I'm going to give you guys some standing predictions, award winners, as well as maybe another bold take or two. Like I said, I already gave one of my bold takes, which is I think that there will be 3 quarterbacks that will pass for over 5,000 yards this upcoming season. Let's get to our standing predictions before we get to major award winners. And then, like I said, folks, we'll kind of see how we're looking for time, about 30-ish minutes into the show as of now. We'll try to aim for that hour 10 mark, hour 15. And like I said, all the stuff after the hour mark will be YouTube exclusive. So let's start with the West Division. And from top to bottom, I have the Saskatchewan Roughriders at 13-5, the BC Lions at 12-6. Excuse me, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at 11-7, the Edmonton Elks at 8-10, the Calgary Stampeders at 5-13. So let's start at the top. I will give a little bit of a brief kind of, why I had them here kind of thing, and give you a little bit of an explanation of why I'm either low maybe on your favorite team, or maybe I'm high on your favorite team, or maybe you think I'm crazy. Either way, you're right. You're absolutely right to your opinion. Excuse me, folks. Let me try to fix that. There we go. You're absolutely right to your opinion, and so am I. So let's start. And folks, like I was saying, if you guys want to go back, actually, I did give somewhat of a similar kind of brief kind of outlook as well on some of these teams on our season predictions of maybe why I thought the Lions matched up good with them, and kind of I did give some of my similar thoughts. So go check out that video. It might be a little bit of a longer, detailed one, actually, to be honest, of some of these teams that maybe we'll have to fly through for this one. But Saskatchewan, I think, like I was saying, is arguably the best team on paper. They have had some injuries, unfortunately, hit them, especially in the offensive line room. I believe losing 2 offensive linemen. I don't know if Philip Gagne is a season ender, but will definitely be a gut punch to start the season. Excuse me, it has already started with Logan Ferland being flipped and moved all up and down the offensive line. He is now slotted in at center. Shout out to Logan. If you guys haven't, go check out our episode with Logan. Big fans of Logan, and obviously supporting, any CFL alumni in the CFL, especially when they're, arguably the best in the business. And I think stick around for who might win our most outstanding offensive lineman. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So I got Saskatchewan, as I said. I think arguably the best team on paper. Montreal fans might want to take a step back. I think where fans should maybe be the most concern, and is probably a good thing if you're a Riders fan, is when you're talking about injuries. And obviously football, as I always say, is 100% injury rate. They're going to come at some point. But if you're kind of relying on injuries for maybe a team to not be good, I think is can obviously come true, and they could be struck by the injury bug, and it could be a very tough season for them. But they could also be so strong that they overcome some of these injuries. I think a guy like Trevor Harris, I'd be curious to see what happens with, if he goes down. Jake Mayer coming in, I think they can kind of keep the same level of play, and the defense can kind of, keep them in games. Jake Maier shouldn't feel like he has to go win games. He can kind of, maybe get above 20 points a game, and that should kind of get you into the ballpark. 21, 24 points a game should get you into the ballpark of winning a lot of football games with that defense. Hopefully, I think they would imagine they want to get that running game back into looking a little bit better than I think they anticipated last year, or better than it looked, I guess, on the field last year. Obviously, they moved on from Rock Armstead as well, a guy that came over, rushed for like over 200 yards, and was a release this offseason. So to go to BC, as Farhan said, arguably the most questions, I think that is probably, right. And I think what gives me confidence to put the Lions here over, the two other teams I think are going to be competitive in the West Division, they have the best quarterback in the CFL. And now I'm sure I'm going to get some comments down below and fully expecting them. But I do believe that Nathan Rourke gets back to the level, not sorry, I shouldn't say the level of play in 2022, because that was a 6,000-yard pace, something that's been done only a handful of times in the CFL. I think he gets, 45, 5K around that mark. And people are going to call that a down year because of the pace that he was on and some of the statistics that he was blowing away. And I think people need to have the right expectations when it comes to Nathan Rourke. And I think he's going to be right where I can expect him to be, like I said, in that 45 to 5,000 yard range, north of 35 touchdowns, I believe. And we'll see how he uses his legs as well. I think is another sneaky weapon, and I think that's ultimately what gives me confidence the most. And I could rightfully look like a fool come October, because I am, I guess, essentially counting out Zach Collaros right now. Not necessarily counting him out to the degree that a lot of Blake, cough Blake, just kidding. But Blake wasn't the only one, but a lot of CFL fans last year were very quick to throw dirt on the grave of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, rightfully so. I held off for as long as possible, and of course, the one game I throw dirt on them, they absolutely blow the piss out of the BC Lions. Zach Collaros, up and down season. Now, obviously, Dalton Schoen is a big one for them, and they would like to see him back. But I just have some questions, or I think, sorry, the questions that I think that a lot of people are asking for the BC Lions, whether now this could ultimately hurt them as well if Nathan Rourke's not able to get to that level of play and he's able to, or he struggles a little bit, will definitely hurt them and amplify those holes even more. We saw that down the back half of the season, right? Of, when you're not playing complementary football, bad things happen, right? The start of the first half of the year, Lions offense was cooking, defense wasn't playing great. Kind of, I wouldn't say opposite, because the defense never really played good per se, but the defense picked it up a little bit in the back half of the year, I would say, and started to have better performances where the offense kind of started to fall off a cliff towards the back half of the year. So question marks for BC, I agree, but I think Nathan Rourke covers a lot of those up. And to be honest, folks, I have a difference of one game here between second and third. We have a difference of two games between first and third, excuse me. So in third place, I had the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at 11-7. So looking at a record, like I said, we have the Saskatchewan Roughriders at 13-5, BC at 12-6, and Winnipeg at 11-7. You can't get really much closer than that. As Farhan mentioned, he maybe a bunch of teams are at 9-9 and fighting and clawing to get into the playoffs. We could also see something like that because of the parity. I think something like this is more probably realistic with the tiebreakers and something like that. I think what gives me confidence that BC is going to be able to take that leap over Winnipeg, and I talked about it in our season prediction. Week number 2 versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at Princess Auto Stadium. Going to be Chris Streveler, more than likely, at quarterback, obviously, with Zach Collaros suspended. This is no slight at Chris Streveler. This is not a shock. This is not a hot take, but Chris Streveler does not scare me as a passer. I think that the Lions will be able to get a win in Winnipeg, although it is a hard stadium. Winnipeg will be fired up to play in front of their home fans in the home opener. That being said, I think Winnipeg, or BC, is able to take care of business in week 2. And then what really gives me confidence is week 3, they actually play a home and home with Winnipeg. Winnipeg's coming to BC. Clean track. I think Zach Collaros and Winnipeg will be very motivated for that being Zach's first game, for them to show that they are going to be a good team this year with hosting the Grey Cup. I just think Zach, it takes them a game or two. We saw it last year with them taking 2 months to get up to form, and you could argue that Zach really never came back to form. And I think it was talked about with we had DB Darren Bombing on Christmas time last year, and he talked about now probably rightfully so, but some leaders in the locker room being still very I don't know if I want to say distraught, but emotional, and still couldn't believe that they lost the Grey Cup, a month later, which obviously they're pro athletes, so they're going to hang on to a little bit longer than maybe the average, Joe Blow. But, you know, I just think losing the Grey Cup again, third year in a row, is going to take its toll on them. And it's no slight to Winnipeg, because I think they are able to reload on the fly, get in the playoffs again, reload next year, still remain competitive. And I think Winnipeg, honestly, kind of gives me hope that they're going to be able to transition pretty cleanly into the next phase of their life, if you want to say, with guys like Taylor Algersma obviously being drafted. Zach Collaros signs the extension into 2026. Taylor Algersma, I think, is going to get that kind of 2-3 year stint that we saw Nathan Rourke get, maybe a little bit longer. And I kind of expect Algersma back in the CFL after that point. They can kind of transition here with a pretty young core with Algersma at quarterback, Oliveira. Look at the quarterback of the defense with Connor Shea. Maybe it's Jalen Smith, is it? Well, I don't know why I draw a blank on their other linebacker they drafted. You look at Schoen, even's a young guy. I know he's late 20s, but say in 3 years, Schoen's going to be 31, 32, and do his just maybe out of his prime, and still giving you valuable reps. I think Winnipeg is going to be a very painful team that a lot of teams are maybe going to count out, and they'll end up surprising them, I think, down the stretch. So we look at fourth place, and I have the Edmonton Elks at 8-10. Pretty much to me, I think, you look at them last year, and you look at them, even the last 3 or 4 years, dating back to the Chris Jones era, they just, for whatever reason, struggled to win close ball games. They found ways to lose that were just only the Edmonton Elks could lose, and it was, the Elks elking all over themselves. I think they're going to be able to muster out, an extra 2-3 wins that, that old Elks team didn't. As Farhan mentioned, arguably best D-line in the CFL. I think it's probably about second for me, second or third. I think Montreal is just, it's hard to kind of match up with some of the horses they have over there. Obviously, Toronto is maybe the best, but they, it's Toronto, it's Edmonton Argos now basically over there with Serezna, Robbie Smith, and all those guys going over. I think Edmonton's going to be improved. I don't think they're going to be improved enough to get into that top 3 in the West. You look at last place, the Calgary Stampeders. Now, you might say, why, Cole? Why do you have the Calgary Stampeders 5-13, last place in the West, but you have Vernon Adams as a 5,000-yard passer? Well, I would simply say, look at Bo Levi Mitchell last season. 5,000-yard passer, and I believe it was 5-13, actually. It might have been coincidental, actually, that worked out that way. I think this is going to be very similar, where that offense is going to be scaring a lot of teams, keeping them in games, maybe even getting out to leads, and teams are going to have to, claw their way back because of that defense. I think that defense has a lot of question marks, especially when you lose, a guy like Mike Rose, who was maybe their most elite guy that they had last season. You could maybe argue Damari Houston, but didn't necessarily replace Mike Rose. Now, obviously, they brought in some additions. And I think they brought in some pretty good additions as well. And obviously on offense, they brought in guys like Dominique Grimes and Vernon Adams as well that will help them. The offense, I think, is only going to be able to do so much, especially in this division. I think the defense will be the downfall of them, especially versus those 3 teams in the front with Sask, Winnipeg, and BC. And I just don't think they have the horses to run and keep up with. That was not that pun wasn't meant. They didn't have the horses, the Stampeders, but yeah. To start from top to bottom, Saskatchewan Roughriders 13-5, BC 12-6, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 11-7, the Edmonton Elks 8-10, and the Calgary Stampeders at 5-13 is what I have going into this year. To go over to the Eastern Division, we have in first place the Montreal Alouettes at 13-5. As I said, you could argue that the Saskatchewan Roughriders are the best team on paper. throw the paper out the window. The Montreal Alouettes are probably the best team in the CFL, bar none, with offense, defense, special teams. They are a very complete bunch when it comes to Americans, Canadians. They are a very deep team, and I think are going to be able to go on a run. What gives me even more confidence is that Davis Alexander has been given the keys to the franchise, with obviously when you move off a guy like Cody Fajardo, who won you a Grey Cup. That being said, I don't think, if they struggle, I think a guy like MBT maybe gets his opportunity at some point. I think the leash is pretty long for a guy like Davis Alexander, rightfully so. But with the team that they have, do they really want to lose a season if they start to get, 2-3, 1-5, whatever they slip to? I think they would go with a guy like MBT, and that gives me the most confidence because obviously people are kind of freaking out with Davis Alexander not looking the greatest in preseason. I think there's going to be that, little bit of a learning curve, like I said earlier. That being said, I just think they're the best team in the CFL, and they're going to be able to cover up some of those holes for Davis, whether, it's growing pains and he struggles and, taking care of the football and some turnovers. I think that defense will be able to bail him out, get the football right back for them, and continue their dominant ways for Montreal. So in second, who do I have in second? Drum roll, please. Who do we have, folks? I think this is going to be a little bit of a different one, especially because I think people are going to be still pretty high on Toronto. But that being said, I'm not. I have the Ottawa Red Blacks in second place at 10-6. I believe there's still some question marks for the Ottawa Red Blacks on defense, Drew Brown, but I just believe they're going to be a competitive bunch once again. I really love what Bobby Dice is doing in Ottawa, the staff he's put together, the team, the culture that he's put together in the nation's capital. They also, I think, have a pretty good roster. Top five, I think, is pretty fair to say. Maybe in that fourth or fifth spot in terms of, I think they're, defensive lines, pretty good. You look kind of in that back, what would it be? 8 secondary linebackers. There's definitely some question marks, more specifically in the secondary, which is a tough one for the D line and the linebackers, right? Where you're kind of at the mercy of maybe some of those guys in coverage and trying to, hold up for as long as you can, or maybe if in the defense D line's case, you're trying to get to the quarterback as fast as you can, so the guys in coverage don't have to stay as long. But I think Ottawa is going to be competitive once again. Drew Brown's going to take another step in his development as a starting quarterback going into year 2. And I like the Ottawa Red Blacks in second place. I think they're going to be able to create some excitement, some engagement in terms of, Montreal. I'm sure will kind of it look like they're running away, but at points I think Ottawa will be able to be right there with them in terms of staying competitive, keeping the hopes alive for the 1 seed. But I would think maybe towards the last few weeks of the season, Montreal pulls away and they're able to kind of secure that few game lead, 3 game, I guess, judging by the predictions I have. So the thing that I want to give to you folks, I think, is a little bit interesting, and maybe my next bold take for this year is that I have a West Division team crossing over into the East Division this year. I have the 8-10 Edmonton Elks crossing over into the East Division and taking the playoff spot from the Toronto Argonauts this season. So the Toronto Argonauts coming off their Grey Cup championship. I think a lot of fans, are high on them, and you know, I can see why, because they've been through this before with reloading on the fly back in 2022 when they won and had to shuffle things pretty quickly. 2023, 2023? No, 2022. 2022. Toronto was 2023. No, I'm a little conflicted. I think it was 2022. Can't remember specifically, but anyways, Toronto reloading on the fly. Yeah, so it was after that Grey Cup, 2023 season, 2022 Grey Cup, I believe. I could be a year behind. Like I was saying, the Edmonton Elks crossing over into the Eastern Division to take the place of the Toronto Argonauts, who I have at 5-13, where I think I'm probably going to get a lot of hate, a lot of Cole, what are you smoking? I hear you, folks. They've done it before. I am just as high. I love Ryan Dinwiddie and everything he's done in Toronto, like Pinball Clemens and the swagger that he brings and the Argos aura of not losing Grey Cup games. I get that. But I also just think at some point it is too much. The losses will be too much. Look on offense, Chad Kelly's probably not going to start the year with his leg rehab, and then obviously there's been reported that he has some ingrown toenail issue and won't start the season. It looks like they're going to go with Arbuckle. I think I'm not as high on Arbuckle, to be honest, folks. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, Arbuckle won them the Grey Cup." Well, I would kind of argue that the defense probably won them the Grey Cup, and Zach Collaros playing with what 4 fingers on his throwing hand probably won them the Grey Cup more than Nick Arbuckle. I think this is not a hot take that I would argue that the losing team should have had the most outstanding. I wouldn't argue the best player on the field at Grey Cup 111 was Willie Jefferson, bar none, bar none. And I would argue even some other guys that maybe can even deserve it over him. A guy like Wynton McManus on defense, Robert Priester, potentially, obviously with the interception touchdown. It goes to Nick Arbuckle because I think the nature of the position, the nature of the game, and most outstanding player of the Grey Cup, hard to kind of give it to a D lineman of the losing team. That being said, I think Toronto just takes a step back. There's too many questions they get. Like I said, Edmonton Argos, they lost their entire defensive line to the West and or NFL, to guys going off into other opportunities. I just don't see the Argos sustaining that level of success, and it is no hot take. I believe that they're able to get back into contention next year, especially with a guy like Chad Kelly under contract. Maybe they move off from him and look to go another direction. But another year for Chad Kelly to, learn the CFL game, get better. I think Chad Kelly's going to be a CFL veteran. It's not that I'm anti Chad Kelly. I just think there's a lot of question marks for the Argos to overcome. One thing I don't question about the Toronto Argonauts, that offensive line. I think that offensive line will help that team a lot on offense and will create a lot of opportunities for them to scheme up things that will be able to help them stay in ball games and help them stay competitive. But I just don't know if they have what it takes to compete, not only in the CFL, but I think in the East as well. I think it's kind of clear that Montreal is number one. Ottawa's, I think, ahead of them. And I look in last place who I have, the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I question whether or not outside of Kenny Lawler, the Ticats got much better. Levi Mitchell, like I said, I fully expect him to go over 5,000 yards passing, similar to Vernon Adams. It's just unfortunate for Bo that at the latter half of his career, a lot of people are maybe going to, myself included, kind of maybe write him off or even forget about some of these years where there's still some good football in Bo Levi Mitchell. Good enough football to go win you a Grey Cup. Good enough football that if you are around the right team, where he's playing for Saskatchewan, a Montreal, even a team like Ottawa, I think, with some of the pieces that are around there, I think just his veteran leadership, his experience in the CFL would just give them a little bit more juice or give them a little bit more when it comes to wins and losses, I guess, than a guy like Drew Brown who's still finding his way and still proving. I think there's still a lot of good for Drew Brown. It's not to sound like a slight at Drew Brown. I just think a guy like Bo Levi Mitchell, a proven Hall of Famer, and the level of play he's still playing at, it's unfortunate that it's kind of being wasted in Hamilton with some non-playoff years. And I would honestly love to see Bo Levi Mitchell in the playoffs staying around, because I think get him in the playoffs and anything can happen for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I just don't see that happening. So let me recap that, folks. First in the Western Division, I have the Saskatchewan Roughriders at 13-5. In second in the West Division, I have the BC Lions at 12-6. And third in the West Division, I have the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at 11-7. In fourth in the West Division, I have the Edmonton Elks at 8-10. And in fifth, I have the Calgary Stampeders at 5-13. In the East Division, I have the Montreal Alouettes in first at 13-5. In second, I have the Ottawa Redblacks at 10-6. In third, and not making the playoffs because the Edmonton Elks will be crossing over, I have the Toronto Argonauts at 5-13. And then in last, I have the Hamilton Tiger Cats at 4-14. Should be an interesting one, folks. I cannot wait. Feel free to comment down below your guys' predictions. Let me know how you guys think the season will turn out. And feel free to come back, comment in November that, Cole, you are a dingus. I don't want to maybe undermine my predictions even more, but I would say that what kind of kept me from maybe even being higher on Edmonton is the last few years, I've been the guy that's trying to been high on Edmonton, especially being a Trey Ford guy, and I think the Elks are going to be good, and they absolutely turn around and stab me right in the back. I couldn't do it for a third year in a row, so I like the Elks this year. I just don't know. It's kind of at some point, it's almost like the Elks are the Elks, and they just kind of find ways to lose games. I'm a little bit hesitant. I am a little bit more positive this year, but I'm curious to see how things turn out, and I'm happy that they'll be returning to the playoffs. So quickly, let's get into my awards, and then let's get out of here, folks. So let's actually go opposite. Let's go from bottom to top is what we're going to do. My rookie of the year for the 2025 CFL season is Jeremiah Ojo or Keelan White. Jeremiah Ojo drafted to the Toronto Argonauts this year, defensive lineman out of the University of Montreal, and Keelan White drafted to the Ottawa Red Blacks out of the University of Montana, wide receiver. Now, this would be definitely a interesting one because this is not typically something that happens, right? It's usually more maybe given to the American first year players, right? Where rookies into the CFL, when we saw it last year with a guy like Nick Anderson, who got rookie of the year. I'm pretty high on both Jeremiah Ojo and Keelan White getting in. I couldn't pick between the two of them because obviously kind of tough to gauge rookies of the year for other franchises outside of BC because just not being down the rabbit hole enough, I guess is the best way to say it. Jeremiah Ojo for me with that defensive line getting ravished in the offseason, the opportunity is there for him right away to come in, compete, get a starting opportunity, I think impress. And he's still learning the game. I think that's the scariest part for a lot of opponents and probably other teams. For Toronto, you're probably absolutely excited if you see that level of play from him this year in terms of a rookie of the year level of play from him right away because he's, I think, only getting into maybe like 4 or 5 seasons of football still. I think he only played his grade 12 season and then his university career. So still learning the game, still growing, still some room to get better. And I think Jeremiah Ojo throughout his career will. And I think he's going to be a guy that's a long-time CFLer at the edge rush position. I look at a guy like Keelan White. When I talk about opportunity for Jeremiah Ojo, I think the same opportunity will be there for a guy like Keelan White with unfortunate news of Nick Marner going down to the torn ACL out for the season. Keelan White pretty much slots right into that position with being drafted in the first round, third overall. Nick Marner, they drafted last season in the first round, able to give that opportunity now to Keelan White. And I think he will be given that opportunity to start and impress. I think will play pretty well in the preseason. He had, I think, one catch for about 6 yards or something like that, and might be a slower start to Keelan for trying to get used to the CFL game coming up from NCAA, being a true Canadian from the beautiful province of British Columbia in North Van. Not really getting to play much Canadian football growing up. He played a little bit maybe with Team BC and stuff like that, but playing in high school football, going to the university, Handsworth Secondary, you play American football. So I'm high on both Ojo and Keelan White to win Rookie of the Year this year. My next one would be the Special Teams Player of the Year. Now, Sean White, plug your ears. BC Lions fans, plug your ears. I wrestled with this very hard of wanting to give this award to Sean White, of being like, this is the year Sean White is going to finally break through and win the Special Teams Player of the Year. And where I would love to see it, and I think that is a very realistic possibility. Janarian Grant, it might be the best special teams player I've ever seen. Now, folks, please do not hate me too much in the comments. I am probably showing my age a little bit with, being a 97 baby, growing up in CFL football. My kind of earliest recollections are maybe 2005. 2006 was kind of some of my 2006 we'll go with actually was my first memories of the Lions of when they won the Grey Cup that season and understanding kind of from that point on. So let's say from 2006 on, I've only been watching CFL football for only 20 years. So Janarian Grant, in my opinion, is arguably the best return I've ever seen. Electric with the ball in his hand. Now he is getting up there, folks, and that's what maybe could maybe slow him down this upcoming season to let Sean White sneak in there and finally grab the award from himself. And like I said, I would love to see that happen, but I would have to go with Janarian Grant. Another guy I wanted to throw in here, but just a little bit too unproven still. But Jermaine Jackson, the BC Lions returner. I know Saskatchewan was pretty high on their returner, that there's going to be some question marks on, I believe it's Devontae Dedman in Saskatchewan, potentially being, a cap, not a cap casualty, but a cut down casualty, I guess is the best way to put it when it comes to Saturday when rosters get cut down. I guess it'll be yesterday by the time you guys are listening this. I wanted to put the Lions in there, but wanted to also remain as unbiased and neutral as possible. I thought Janarian Grant is the best special teams player in the CFL, and that's what I'm going to put my money on, is Janarian Grant being Janarian Grant this season. I would love to see guys like Sean White, Jermaine Jackson. Like I said, folks, keep an eye on for Jermaine Jackson. And the Saskatchewan returner is actually slipping my mind right now, which I would wish I kind of remember that, to throw his name in there as well for guys to keep an eye on for potential also rookie of the years as well, potentially. But most outstanding offensive lineman, I'm going to go with, as I teased earlier, Logan Ferland. Big fan of Logan Ferland, Regina Thunder alum, a guy that cut his teeth playing for CJFL football, made the jump into the CFL and without going to university, and sink or swim, he's swimming. He's arguably the best offensive lineman in the CFL, Canadian or not, and really excited to see what he can put on the field this season. It's unfortunate that the injuries have already started to come into play for Saskatchewan, and things are going to be shuffled around there even more. But Logan was the runner-up for this award last season to Ryan Hunter. And as I said, with some Instagram commenters of they were a little bit taken back that I had Logan Ferland over a guy like Ryan Hunter in my top 10 Canadians. I don't think it was a hot take that Logan Ferland was right up for the running to win that award last season and to be the most outstanding offensive lineman. So that was not intended to be a shot at Ryan Hunter whatsoever. It was just to maybe complement the level of play that the offensive line was the offensive linemen were at last year, especially with a guy like Ryan Hunter kind of bouncing around as well. I know he has some position flexibility, and it's maybe not as publicized as Ferland's is, but Ferland's, man, it was just incredible. I believe starting at 3 positions, playing 4 of them, and just incredible durability throughout a long season as well. So my next award is the most outstanding defensive player, and I'm going to give it to linebacker Darnell Sankey. Last year I went with a linebacker as well. I went with Wynton McManus. Ultimately did not happen. I'm going to go with a linebacker again. I would be curious to see what happens, with the edge rushers maybe being a little bit hungry, but a linebacker hasn't won it in a while, which is why I'm trying to kind of speak this or will this into existence with a guy like Darnell Sankey. And we saw it pretty early on in training camp with the video the Montreal Alouettes released, him being very motivated. And obviously you could, that's all 53 guys in camp, Cole. That's a silly thing. But Darnell Sankey is a guy that, to me, when I, watch a Montreal Alouettes game, he's all over the field on majority of plays where you can't really, go without hearing Sankey's name a few minutes at a time, right? Where he's always around the ball. He's not only a linebacker by, just racking up the tackles. He'll come downhill and in the blitz and get tackles for loss and rack up sacks, and also I think chip in with interceptions. And I think that's why I have faith in him. And also I did kind of potentially think about going with some defensive linemen from Montreal because I think they do have the best defensive line in the CFL. But with a guy like Roland Milligan winning last season Defensive Player of the Year, I thought the defensive line is going to be able to benefit a guy like Darnell Sankey in Montreal. I look at that Montreal Alouettes defense when they're 4 deep. I think they're going to be not only able to keep Darnell Sankey clean, coming downhill and making clean tackles, but also get to the quarterback, flush him out of the pocket. Sankey's able to get a lot of cleanups, sacks, maybe some tips into interceptions, stuff like that. I think that's the pathway for Darnell Sankey to win most outstanding defensive player. Most outstanding Canadian, I have winning back-to-back. Just kidding. We do not have Brady Oliveira winning back-to-back, as though I did thought about that. I did think about that as potentially my hot take or bold take, as well as Brady Oliveira winning most outstanding Canadian back-to-back. Come on, folks. You know me. You know I've been saving the receipts for quite some time, and I'm very excited to see QB1 Kid Canada Nathan Rourke back on the field for the BC Lions this season. Without going on too big of a rant, I think Nathan Rourke shuts a lot of foolish people up this season, and I think is rightfully back up to the top of the top Canadians in the CFL. And that is no slight. I do not want to hear it at Brady Oliveira, Justin McKinnis, anybody in the top 5, Logan Ferland. those guys are elite as they come in the CFL, and it is not a slight. Brady Oliveira is arguably the best player in the CFL. And I think Nathan Rourke, you could argue, is the best player in the CFL as well. Legitimate arguments with them being Canadians is just very cool to see. Um, Most outstanding player. Before I get to that, I'm going to give you guys my most outstanding, coach of the year, which I'm going to give it to Corey Mace, a guy that I'm a big fan of, a Vancouver guy, I believe a Coquitlam boy growing up in the Lower Mainland over on the Lower Mainland. I'm a big fan of Corey Mace. Thought he arguably should have won it last season. Ultimately goes to um, Montreal's quarterback. Head coach. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank right now. Why am I drawing a blank right now? Sorry, folks. I gotta. One of those things like it's gonna drive me crazy until I. Jason Moss. Oh man, that drives me crazy. Um, Corey Mace. I am very high on Corey Mace, and I think Saskatchewan, as I said, arguably the best team in the CFL. If Montreal is able to get a win or two above, I think it probably ultimately goes back to Jason Moss and uh, well earned, rightfully so. But I'm kind of trying to hope Corey Mace is it's a nice 13-5, 13-5 split, and the award can kind of maybe go to the not right guy. I don't want to say that because I'm kind of undermining Jason Moss's accomplishments, but I just think what Corey Mace has done there in Saskatchewan, building his own culture and competitive culture as well, is something that I really admire, and I think that it's been talked about multiple times. Of we heard of the I believe it was the penalties from over the weekend of guys, or excuse me, it wasn't the penalties, it was the keeping guys up with thud periods in camp. Of usually they try to like to keep guys up and not go to the ground when it comes to tackling offense versus defense. You want to keep guys up and just avoid injury risk at all possible. And I believe they were kind of, you know, getting a little bit too close to, comfort, and some guys were going to the ground. Injuries were happening, obviously, and Corey Mace making them run and stuff like that, and not taking any shit. And I think as a guy that's kind of one of those player coaches, right, where that you can go to him to be a bro and be a coach, but he's also going to be a hard ass, and he's also going to be on you for the right reasons. So I got Corey Mace winning the Coach of the Year this season for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. My MOP. This was a tough one, folks. I think arguably the toughest one of my awards prediction. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Davis Alexander as my MOP. I went back and forth with Trevor Harris as well. I think Trevor Harris is going to have a good season. I think I have a little bit more faith, which is going to be interesting, right? Because it's almost contradicting myself a little bit with going with Corey Mace. So maybe that seems like Saskatchewan's kind of the better team going into the awards portion where, it's recency bias later in the season, right? I think Davis Alexander is going to be the one playing better later in the year where Montreal maybe isn't struggling, but winning some closer games where teams are maybe thinking they should blow them out. And Davis isn't able to rack up the stats until he starts to get comfortable. I think, after Labor Day, he's going to start to get really comfortable, and we're going to start to see some pretty big performances from him. And I think only get better and better going into the playoffs. Saskatchewan, Trevor Harris. I'm just too I'm a little too shy of what I wanted to put Trevor into the MOP, the injury concern. I think, like I said earlier with Saskatchewan, I think if Trevor does go down, Jake Mayer is able to fill in and stay at the floor, not get necessarily to the ceiling of Trevor Harris, but stay at the floor when he comes in, keep Saskatchewan relevant, keep Saskatchewan winning games. We saw that last year, right, where Trevor Harris went down. Guys like Shea Patterson and a few of the other guys that came in, Mason Fine, I believe, was another one. They're not able to keep that floor. Obviously, like it's hard to get to the ceiling of Trevor Harris, right? He's one of the better quarterbacks that has ever played in the CFL, right? Is a very good quarterback. No matter what people say, right? There's a lot of people, maybe haters. Shane probably being a little bit one of them. Jokes aside, but I got Davis Alexander because I think he's going to be the one that stays healthy. I think ultimately a guy like Trevor Harris probably misses a game or two just with age and stuff like that, and question marks in the offensive line. You look at Montreal. I don't know how many guys are going to be breathing around Davis Alexander, especially with them probably being up in a lot of games and being able to run the football. Now that's going to take away from Davis Alexander being able to pad stats and stuff like that. But it'll be interesting to see that if there's if there's 3 5,000-yard passers, and Davis Alexander isn't one of them, does that make sense for him to win it? Maybe, maybe not. So that'll be an interesting one to see as well. I do have Trevor Harris within. I think he's one of the candidates. Without saying too much, and I think Nathan Rourke is another one, but it'll just be interesting. I think Bo will take himself out of the conversation with losses as well, but it will be another conversation. Like Bo could be in the conversation if their team could win a few more games. So about hour 10 right there, folks. So that was a lot of fun. And like I said, it is game week. It is finally June, and we have some CFL football to talk about. You can find Blake and I later this week breaking things down. We'll be joined by guests from the Edmonton Elks to preview the game and then give Blake and I's thoughts on the BC Lions portion. And then, of course, things kick off Thursday evening between the Ottawa Red Blacks and Saskatchewan. Oh, no. Saskatchewan Roughriders? Might have been Winnipeg. No, Saskatchewan Roughriders. Ottawa coming to Saskatchewan Thursday at 6:30 p.m. I, for one, folks, am very excited to do nothing next Thursday. Come home and watch some CFL football is something that I am very, very excited for. Other than that, like the video, comment down below, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. And we will see you guys closer to the regular season.